Welcome, truthers and truth-curious mainstreamers. This is Poe's Law with me, Charlatan Poe. So I've been out of touch with my shaman mentor for a while. To be honest, this whole business that I've gotten involved in is starting to freak me out. So I took a step back, but after getting that package, I realized I don't have an option but to push forward. So reached out to her, and she had some single-use candles that created a 5-dimensional circle of protection, or sphere, I'm not sure what shape. A 5th-dimensional circle of protection. And then it was more, but it had unlimited usage. This 2-part system that could be used multiple times. It just needed, the 2 parts needed to be connected and then speak the word of power. And it's my understanding that by creating that 5th dimensional circle of protection, I'll be able to carry out this live stream, but have at least a buffer from whatever these forces are, these cabal forces that are intersecting and interjecting themselves into my life. So we can maybe make some progress together. So please keep joining, send in your questions. I've got a starting pool that I collected from previous sessions that didn't get answered, and what I put out a call yesterday, and some came in overnight. Whew. Okay, so she said I might feel extremely powerful something, or I might not notice anything at all, and anything in between. So she said to expect anything. So here we go. Connect the 2. Ba dolgarata kamanaran kanbran tanaran tuan tuntrovar hunanskan tuhurdenen dernuk. I think I felt something. Might have just been imagining it. Feels like we're in a zone, though, where we can do this. So there have been a lot of good questions. I think building some kind of consensus together, us psychic pilgrims forming this community, we can start to maybe feel more stable. If we can achieve a level where, if it weren't so weird, it would almost be mundane, that kind of resting state stability. These assaults of strangeness, conspiracy, cabal power moves are easier to take. You can mount a defense, but if you need a rest, you can relax without falling out of this higher awareness. So that's the reasoning behind this. So I'm going to start digging into the tweet storm here. One, all right. Ooh. What the fuck? At Unleash the Sovereign Body, star 69. If I'm against vaccination, do I have to be for abortion? Asking for a friend. God damn it. Okay. The advent of the plague has changed the nature of this question. In an extremely, well, in the short term, because now vaccination includes whether or not to get this very brand new plague vaccine that they've developed. They utilized some kind of like AI, pattern recognition, nanotechnology, and like, I don't know. I've seen a pretty good analysis that it seems to involve some kind of ET technology that was either discovered at some of the ancient landing sites or is a more recent transaction. There's disagreement on when this technology arrived, but there seems to be agreement that it is extraterrestrial. It's all over the place on whether or not the plague is extraterrestrial. So, yeah, the vaccination question now has taken on a different tone because of that, and long view, the abortion question also kind of chillingly does take on a different tone because the plague has just bottomed out birth rates. The school of thought that this is, as we're discovering, a new normal created by a time war. For those who have not realized that that's what's happening yet, the new normal of just history unraveling into this dystopia that we're living in. Birth rates have gone down. There are enough human beings on the planet that we don't have to worry about underpopulation for a real long time, but since this is kind of a pure thought, like abstract ethics question in a way that finds a manifestation in the current and political. If we don't want extinction, we need to keep the birth rate up, and disturbingly, in human history and across the world, the ways that tribes and civilizations keep that birth rate up has not been the greatest for equality and freedom. I don't really know if I want to go any farther with that idea, except to say that I hadn't connected those two things before, of wanting the sovereignty to make a decision on abortion and not have it be made for me, or even the option have been decided for me. But I also want to diminish sovereignty in the subject of vaccination. That's kind of like, that would be my instinct because it's a public good, but if it's mandated, that's also disturbing to me. So I guess tell your friend this is also confusing. You don't have to be for or against anything. You can vote present as things continue to unfold. At real Twitter follower 8675309. Is it true you poop out your mouth when you're in space? That is true. Yeah, it's one of those things we take for granted for gravity, that we don't have to poop out our mouths. But if there's no gravity, it's going the other way, guys. So next time you flush, maybe send a thank you down after the turd into the bowels of the earth, so that gravity knows to stick around. Man. Yeah, when the astronauts are wearing those helmets, too, like, they don't tell you that often when you watch NASA stuff, but they have the most precise poop routines of any organism ever, I think, because you don't want to poop into your helmet when you're out on a spacewalk. At Lost Shopping Cart. If shadow banning necessarily means more light in the world, why is it bad? Hashtag physics, hashtag do your research. This gets into some cyber magic territory, which I only know kind of second and third hand. I haven't trained in that kind of technomancy, cyber magic area at all. So, the shadow work, shadow binding, I guess if I step back, at least on my surface understanding, is that shadow banning makes more light, but if you think about what makes shadows, it's us. It's existence. Things occupying space in the world are what stop the light or absorb the light and create a shadow. And if you want to get rid of shadows, you can get an additional source of light from an opposite direction. Yes. You can also go the darker path of eliminating the thing that was absorbing the light in the first place. So there's the 1 and the 0, the positive and negative, as above, so below. Everything that exists in 3 dimensions also can exist in 4, and so on. The observable effects don't always reveal all of the effects of something. So as we're seeing more shadow banning, and we're seeing a mix of both eliminating the thing that created the shadow and bringing more light in to reduce the shadows, the net effect isn't actually the same. The 0 isn't the same as the 1. That's about the limit of my kind of techno magic, cyber magic, technomancy kind of stuff. I'm much more comfortable with kind of the quantum physics stuff, but usually if I start talking about quantum physics, I lose my audience pretty quickly because I have to go like 100% telepathy, and just to have enough bandwidth to start to grok some of the concepts. And since I'm not, a lot of people aren't comfortable just resting in that telepathy with another person to try and understand a concept. So I'm going to stick to that answer, and I think we'll call it. Next question. At Princess Pound Puppy Winky Face, why do you hate gerrymandering? That's a good question. So, gerrymandering was created by Gerald Ford, and if you've ever seen House of Cards, that is based on the Ford presidency. He is the 20th century Machiavelli. Nixon gets a lot of attention, but it was Ford who was elected by 3 counties here in Michigan, and that's it. He was a representative who got picked to replace the vice president, and then Nixon stepped down, and Ford became the president. That, in a lot of ways, is a much more interesting story about the United States than the effect of Nixon and the revelations of his corruption and his paranoia. The system of succession that came after, where a man was elected by the smallest popular vote by orders of magnitude in United States history, was the president for, I'm not sure how long his term, I don't think he got reelected. See, like, even knowing all of that, I'm still fuzzy on the details. He really was just this really forgettable guy, or at least his public persona was this really forgettable thing. He's like a kind of local football coach kind of guy. I mean, he kind of actually was just a local football guy, right? He was a representative. He only ever had to appeal to 3 lightly urban, mostly rural counties in Michigan here. And yet, he was able to not only pardon Nixon. If you go to his statue, and where his presidential library is, the quote that's on there is just him basically saying, "America, I'm not Nixon." It's longer than that, but that's all he has to say, and that's on the statue of him in front of his library, and his statue is barely life-size. And yet, he invented gerrymandering, which is a particular party, when it's in power, changing the electoral system, which is theoretically neutral and meant to be equitable across all citizens, changing districts so to benefit that party. It's the most insidious party parasitism of America. Gerald Ford came up with it, and it just goes by this cute name of gerrymandering. And it is the biggest reason for our 2-party system to it fuels the continued stranglehold of this 2-party corrupt system on the United States in a way that few other things do. And that's why I hate gerrymandering. I'll probably edit this out later. Just need a second. It's the kind of shit that just gets under your skin, and you have to learn to, like, you just grow some scar tissue over it so it doesn't hurt anymore. because you can't do anything about it. I mean, it's, although you can chart, mathematically maybe, the spread of a movement, trace it backward into to the first few individuals, maybe, if it's not something that just starts organically across the country. Like if it's something that starts very specific, you can theoretically actually trace the spread of the idea back to just those few individuals. And yet, even when there's this popular resentment for an injustice and imbalance, something that is obviously not helpful to our well-being, but is only helpful to the well-being of some superstructure, this two-party system. But it's so big, trying to imagine changing it. There's not a map for that. Almost every movement is unique in that way. That even though we know more about human psychology and marketing than at any point in history, it's still impossible somehow to have an exact control of, okay, that thing needs to change. We know what's standing in our way. Here's the strategy, XYZ, it can change. The list of those things that are desirable to change, even by a majority of people, and with no shortage of organizations and individuals who have studied the problem and have excellent ideas on how to make it happen, the final ingredient, the most important lifeblood, people's thoughts and beliefs and actions combined, it's a complete mystery how to marshal enough of that to actually make the change. And I'm not talking about just electing a candidate. I'm talking about it's a constitutional amendment, let's say. It is a fucking miracle we have as many as we do. I don't even know when the last amendment was passed. I should look it up. Should do my research. Because the idea of that happening now, and at the same time witnessing this incredible and rapid pace of change, not in just kind of on paper policy decisions, but completely organic or grassroots changes, the implementation and spread of and adoption, the willing and voluntary adoption of cell phone technology, and the proliferation of things, and the way so many individuals around the world have just recognized utility, facility, ease, convenience, benefit, just something positive enough to adopt the technology so that it's ubiquitous now. That wasn't all the, obviously cell phone companies sell cell phones, have advertising, yes. But at some point when it began and as it spread, that it wasn't just being driven by marketing, by a salesman selling. They didn't become ubiquitous by a salesperson coming to the door of every person on the planet to say, here are the benefits for this. It grew over the years. And it's changed everything. Unplanned. There's no point 20, 30 years ago that someone looked at the ubiquity now and the way they would be used and was like, okay, this is what we need to do. Here's how we get there. We can predict how beneficial ending gerrymandering would be, and just making districts county by county. I don't actually know what the best answer would be, but making districts mixed enough somehow that it was like every election was a toss-up, because the candidate that won would have to appeal to a diverse majority and we would get better representation, but that's not the way it goes. And nobody knows why. Plenty of people suggest why, but if somebody actually knew, I wouldn't have to be talking about it. But you can't spend all your time in this level of like anxiety and anger and analysis, so you step back and you just kind of develop some scar tissue and say, like, this is a thing. And sometimes it'll end up on the ballot, like recently here in Michigan, where supposedly we're ending gerrymandering, but it's still to be seen if this solution works or actually makes a change. And nobody, like, how you get to a critical mass of people acting on this idea from not a critical mass, that tipping point, how you build to that tipping point and what the tipping point is, nobody really knows. There's just this jostling anarchy of ideas and beliefs right now. And what has coalesced into a dominant constellation is super shitty. Dotted with some bright spots, I suppose. And if you start to wake up in the spaces between the bright spots to realize how few bright spots there are and how bright spots seem to be diminishing if you look in the trajectory that we're going, as has been documented, or I've been trying to document and share, it's a disturbing path to start to investigate that shit. So that's why I'm out here, is connecting with all of you. I apologize for that rant. And somehow we grew to over 300,000 people. So onward, psychic pilgrims. Act lonely, especially if not alone. I understand that. I forget history, doomed to repeat it, but I also want to let go and move on. Advice? I think that's kind of what I was just talking about, is it, if I examine the feelings closely, there is a difference between acceptance and surrender. It's not a perfect analogy to like the shadow banning and light work or the different options to reduce shadows. But it's close. There's kind of like a positive or uplifting or maturing sense in acceptance, and there's a kind of defeat in surrender. There's also this kind of crazy wisdom mystic kernel in surrender, though. It's not, I was about to say, this is not the video to get into it, but I'm already just rambling everywhere. So there is something like just completely overpowering and just a rapturing mystic moment of experience where your sense dissolves, in a really positive way. There's not a great way to talk about that. I would refer you to look up your own stick of choice to have better language on that topic. But letting go and moving on without forgetting, so you don't repeat it. Learning from your past without letting it control you. I think that's the goal. That's right up there with life goals. If you want to have any peace in life, so I do my best, which hasn't always been that great, but I am trying to get better, to make my best better, which is way different than perfection. It's miles away from perfectionism. So what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. You also can be so scarred as to lose function and flexibility. You're not dead. That story I told about almost getting killed at the bottom of that hill made this idea vivid, that even if you believe in some kind of destiny, you can still carry out whatever you're meant to do, even if you're not wholly intact. And I think the most of us can hope for is only mere moments of, rapturous fulfillment, maybe at some point, of fulfilling your purpose, or this is what I was meant to do. That, the real payoff, sublime bliss of that moment has to carry you through just a slog and grind of mundane, just making it. This is just accepting your mundane day to day, doing the best you can or the right thing over and over and over and over again. And occasionally you get a moment. I guess this is similar to what I was just talking about, where the bright spots in the darkness. It's not like in a personal development, spiritual sense is what I mean now. It's less of a cosmic good and evil kind of. The point is, learning from your mistakes and getting better is the way to go. You're trying to rest on this idea that I'm meant for something, that moment of whatever you're meant for, that thing that you're meant for, rests on top of a lot of just learning to live with things. And you can be hurt badly and have to live with that hurt in order, and you can still get to that moment that you're meant for. So I need to take a pee break. I will be right back. Alright, we're back. As I stepped away, I noticed a question came in related to, I don't know if this will translate onto the recording. There's this kind of hiss. Like a shh. Quick reached out to my shaman mentor, and she said that that's something trying to get through the 5D circle of protection, kind of hear the interference of something trying to get in. I'm going to keep recording while that's going on. Well, I was going to record anyway. But even though it seems like this live stream has been noticed, and and something's trying to stop it. We're going to see if it can get through, if the 5D circle of protection holds, if it was worth the money. Also maybe learn something together about what or who these cabal forces or Time War agents are trying to get at us. So pay attention for that, I guess. All right, next question. I had another. I noticed when I just happened to step back in, asking about 5D. So 3 dimensions are space, 4 dimensions are time, and 5D. I don't know if it has a name, but it's a dimension where you can, if you were in it, you could somehow see space time as something, and see, I guess I should put in quotes, or you could sense it somehow. Alan Moore's Jerusalem, after I was introduced to the concept, actually was a very beautiful book, and just a really fascinating kind of descriptions, helping you wrap your mind around time, space and time. Or you can look up 2 clocks are synchronized on Earth. Astronaut or a probe goes up into space and then returns, and there's a time discrepancy between the 2 clocks because time moves at a different speed farther away from the center of gravity of Earth. Gravity affects time. The way, though, that extra dimensionality impinges on us here would have to be weird if we notice it at all, and is poorly understood at best, I think. So since that related to what we're doing right now, I wanted to bump that question to the head. It had a lot of likes. So let's go back to the backlog here. Keep them coming, by the way. Thank you, everyone who's joining into the tweet storm here. Okay, at Broke and Wondering Why. Explain the connection between Moore's Law and the election cycle. I did put this back on, I think. Yeah, okay, this is recording. Noise is like drilling into the back of my mind. All right, Moore's Law and the election cycle. Moore's Law is, I think, the idea that, I think it's the amount of storage on a microchip doubles every 2 years. It's the exponential curve of progress, I think, is a shorthand for that, even though that isn't technically what I think it originally referred to. So the technology doubles every 2 years. Every 2 years we have an election cycle, which is a linear kind of pattern. Not that I don't think we need elections at an exponentially increasing rate, but it, I think, is an interesting parallel that 2 years is the iteration. I think that maybe fluctuates with Moore's Law a little bit, but the connection between it is the disparity between our political process being designed and continues to be carried out using structures from an exponentially antique social experiment stage. The technology that's been increased, doubling every 2 years, has gone vertical. And while we're continuing to just kind of plod along this way, and it is an interesting way to think about the problems that we see. At 10101010101001. Don't know what that means in binary. What about January 17? So there's a number 8, 1 plus 7, which interesting connection there to the American government, 1943. 19 at 10 plus 17, so that adds to 8 as well. So just the 8s connect those two. Which is an interesting, I wouldn't have made connection I wouldn't have made without this question. I'm going to try and just maintain here and freak out about this later, but January 17 is the date Allen Ginsberg wrote, or the line of dedication in Allen Ginsberg's poem, America, where he goes into this mid-20th century kind of shamanic questioning of like the psychic civilization, or like his mental, emotional, social, animal, spiritual gestalt, the zeitgeist, the place, the psychic geography of America he investigates in that poem. And it's also the date that Eisenhower gave his military-industrial complex farewell address. I don't know. There may be other significant things that have happened on that date. Those two are the two that I am familiar with that suggest something important about January 17, some kind of prophetic window connection, and now making that number 8 connection between that prophetic window and the book that the Man in Black brought. To look at that more closely, see if there are any January 17s in there. At random number revolution, all caps, sharing coupons is not collective bargaining. It's not a question. That's just, I guess, random number revolutions, point of order. Sharing coupons is not collective bargaining. At Behemoth versus Leviathan versus Godzilla. How can in the beginning let there be light when no sun till fourth day? Quantum. This actually gets into spiritual light compared with physical. It's this kind of like two realms, or like as above, so below moment. You can connect let there be light to, what is it, 1 John, or in the beginning there was the Word. Right? There's the Logos giving birth to itself. And then the fourth day, getting the sun, is the unfolding dimensionally. We light, stars, matter, energy, the Big Bang when it gets going. I'm sure there are good quantum explanations, but I don't. Most of the quantum physics that I know is outside of quantum theology, and for whatever reason, the two departments don't coordinate very well. So there's that. There's also the interesting connection of the fourth, squaring the circle, the element of time, since we've been talking about dimensions. So the parallel of 1 in the beginning, 4, you get the sun. The 1 and the 4 correlate. I think 2 and 5, and then 3 and 6 correlate as well. And then 7 days of the week, there's another 7 that adds into the sense of foreboding in whatever path this is. Thank you for everyone who's here. It's nice to have some vibes, get some connections here, so I don't feel like this is just happening in a vacuum. At Bouquet of Eyes, EYES. Do you think we should switch to a draft lottery? I don't know that it would be worse. If you're not familiar, the draft lottery is a theory or idea, where obviously it comes from the draft to fight in wars in the past, but using that idea, the selective service, to be everyone 18 and up. Well, it's the ages in the Constitution, and then for like state and local offices, it adopts the federal system of age requirement, federalism of age requirements to fulfill offices, but just randomizes it from there in a selective service fashion. So instead of elections, the time periods are the same, but instead of spending all the money and time on elections, we just draw selective service numbers, and that's how we fill the offices. So there's an acknowledgement that there would maybe be a transition period, or that's where a lot of the disagreement comes in, is how to get from here to there. But once there, in the same way like everyone gets drafted in the Israeli army, and so as a nation there's aside from other problematic things, there's an interesting core experience to the people to Israeli citizens or people who grow up in Israel, and this idea of public service for 2 years after high school, whether it's in the military or like AmeriCorps public service programs, volunteering. It's not volunteering if it's mandatory, and that idea kind of rankles, gets my hackles, bothers my sense of individualism. But treating public office more like jury duty in a way. So eventually we get enough people who have had enough experience in civics. We change the education system to better prepare everyone on the needs of office. Local school systems are organized at a local level. There are national standards set, but so like local curriculums could incorporate like the idiosyncrasies of localities as far as what is required of public office. there may be some kind of parasitic system that manifests under there to corrupt a majority, but it's also hard to imagine never knowing who's going to fill the office and it having the rapid, relatively turnover of 2, 4, 6 years. Hopefully corruption doesn't doesn't take a foothold. So that's. Do I think we should switch to a draft lottery? This is for public office. We already have the draft still for a war. They just don't invoke it or haven't. We have not had an active draft, but it's still just every male over 18 in this country to participate fully and have access to everything bureaucratically. You still need to register your identity to theoretically be called up to go into battle. That's something that could happen. It's an enforceable law. So why not maybe get rid of that or expand that so that we can just get out of this fucking mess of what our electoral process has become. Got 2 there, kind of looked at them, so let's keep it random. Grandma's got a secret. Have you looked into the Pleiades connection? I hadn't, but I see exactly what you're saying with that, and now I'm going to. Pleiades are the 7 sisters. Another number 7, so need to look into Pleiades itself, I guess, and also the Pleiadians or the Pleiadian identifying people that are already here, and see how that lines up, kind of tracking the places that 7 manifests. At My Uncle Loves Me. What do you make of the lost numbers of Atlantis theory? I'm of the school that thinks things like pi, the imaginary number, phi, the Fibonacci sequence, those, I think, what is it, the infinitesimal, I think it's called, there's some weird and spooky things that exist in the realm of mathematics, and I think that those are rediscoveries of these lost numbers of Atlantis. That's the theory that I tend to gravitate toward. It makes more sense to me that after losing all of that knowledge, it wasn't really lost, it was just in genetic memory, and the project has been going on long enough that we have rediscovered what was known then. It's hard to imagine a civilization that was as advanced as Atlantis was that wouldn't have figured out a durable way to encode, or at least a resilient way to encode the things they knew in the world. In the same way we have fire flood-proof safes that you can put shit in. There's just, or creating the sealed underwater server banks. because it's such a cold and stable environment. So we have discovered ways to make things last. Just even like the most boring of things like styrofoam or plastics. So we have discovered that can resist the entropy and decay. So I think that Atlantis definitely would have found a way, and I think the way they found was just the genetic program that is humanity. I think there are probably Atlantean artifacts in other species that we have yet to find. I think things like raccoons and dolphins and crows. I tend to also include like squirrels and pigeons in that group. There are complexities that are suggested in what we know about those animals. That there's maybe something to learn there, but there's just not a lot of funding for that line of research. At Big Money Redneck God 21, why does MSM suppress the most obvious and effective solution for climate change, strategic nuclear winter? MSM is mainstream media. If you're just joining in, or you're just starting to wake up and investigate this kind of stuff, I think we don't talk about nuclear winter as an option to reverse climate change for a couple of reasons. One, at some point in the late 20th century, there were more effective boogeymen that were realized and implemented to hold the captive, the public id, and our primal fear. So there's just not a lot of energy to talk about nuclear or the continued existence of nuclear. Like, nothing has changed from, if anything, it's gotten worse actually since the nuclear scares of the 50s. Other than just we've had enough time and generations to get used to the fact that nuclear apocalypse could happen at any moment if really just a handful of individuals on the planet had the wrong pattern of understanding. It would take mere moments for just the fewest number of people to wipe out billions of people, maybe forever. That's absolutely real. There are better things to make us afraid now. Maybe because they're less crippling, or maybe because, well, you can only maintain that level of fear for so long, and with just enough generations have accommodated it that now it doesn't. We just play nuclear apocalypse games like they're fun. It's a trope that just gets put into the fiction. So it's hard to access the public mind to talk about it as a live option for reversing climate change. The other reason is I don't know, I don't quite subscribe to, but I find some truth in the idea that the genes, the DNA that existed on all the for all the organisms before early photosynthetic organisms achieved a critical mass to turn the majority atmosphere of Earth to be oxygen rich. So the oxidative revolution, it happened billions of years ago, but life had evolved. Life had evolved under a majority carbon dioxide atmosphere. And then when there wasn't, when oxygen, because of photosynthesis, became available. Oxygen is an incredibly destructive element, or unstable. It's oxidation, rust, destruction. But plants evolved to put out oxygen and evolved to survive under it, and there was a transition period in early life on Earth where organisms died out because they could no longer, because the Earth had been terraformed by organisms that evolved after them. We are living in billions of years later, that oxidative time, but there's no guarantee that it has to maintain, and we, by using fossil fuels, it's life that has gone before, we are reigniting and disassembling it back into the atmosphere. The trapped, I mean, like all life comes from plants. I mean, not like plants evolved early, but also just current life that lives on life. You know, autotrophs, plants; heterotrophs, us, animals, live on them, and it all comes from the sun. So this chemistry that's been going on of turning light into matter, we're reversing to turn matter back into light and energy and gas again. So increasing, putting these atoms back out into the atmosphere. I think there are a number of viruses that have been incorporated into our genome over time that we don't think are doing anything, but they maybe are. I think that there may be some kind of ancient DNA that has evolved to create us, to create the ability to return the Earth to a pre-oxygen state of nature. It's a fulfillment of a program, a multi-billion-year program that has a weird symmetry that I have a hard time shaking. So I think that that non-personal program may be at work as well, because we don't want that. So it doesn't want climate change interrupted, the reverse terraforming or the restoration of climate change. It doesn't want that interrupted. So the most viable solution of nuclear winter gets kind of deselected for by something almost subconscious when when it's looked at. Unicorns can't be trusted. Will spontaneous combustion be weaponized in World War III? If there's a World War III, I tend to doubt there will be in this. I know I just talked about nuclear apocalypse, but I tend that isn't the same thing as World War III. Like a extension of World War I, World War II on that model. World War III, all the nations of the Earth allied in multiple factions, just war of attrition until peace is achieved again. I don't think that will happen, at least in the foreseeable future, because the forces that created those wars in the past have found much more efficient and profitable ways to invest and harvest energy. So I don't think spontaneous combustion will be weaponized in World War III, because I don't think World War III, in the way that this kind of infers, is likely. I do think spontaneous combustion will be weaponized, however. Just probably for like targeted assassinations and stuff. I don't have a lot of battery left, so we're just gonna do one more, maybe two, and then we'll call it. I know this is going long, but I needed this, so thank you for hanging out. At Pumpkin at Midnight, is it true you are a member of the Bound Carpenters? So the Bound Carpenters are ancient order that was kind of organized to oppose Freemasons. I have seen. There's just some stuff over the course of my life that makes me think my dad, or definitely my grandpa, was involved at the least in Bound Carpenters, but that the supposedly, and to all appearances, they disappeared kind of suddenly into the John Birch Society. Whether that was a power grab or that was kind of a cult, cryptic move to divert attention, to go into hiding, I don't know. So no, I'm not a member of the Bound Carpenters. I don't like spending time with other people that much. Okay, last question. At Super Secret Poison Ivy, was Lewis Carroll the first Neo? He talked about the rabbit hole 100 years before The Matrix was released. No, Lewis Carroll wasn't the first Neo. I think there are some powerful things encoded in the movie The Matrix, but I think just Neo is just a Christ resurrection God. Great, there's another connection. So yeah, time travel intervention, it seems like is causing, or is what is involved in the resurrection mythology. There's a video on that somewhere that I recorded, so go back and find it. If I remember, I'll say it in the next video. He was a kind of mathematical shaman, though, and was a powerful linguistic sorcerer. So the rabbit hole, he was, I think, maybe one of the first people to use that analogy in the way he did, but he was drawing on ancient imagery of the significance of rabbits to do it. So I don't think he fits the Neo archetype. He is maybe more like a Morpheus, I would say, if I had to draw a connection. And he did and didn't invent the rabbit hole. Okay. Battery is seriously about to go, so I will call it here. Thank you to... the counter keeps fluctuating. I think that... Wow, the interference is still going. So I'm probably going to leave the 5D circle up for a while until that noise stops, but I am going to end the stream here, so stay tuned.